Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Underground. Today is January 22nd, 2022, and I'm very excited to be able to bring everybody a great interview with Brad Olsen. I reached out to Brad about a week ago, and we connected right away, and Brad was interested in coming on the show, and I've been following his work, so I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation tonight. So thank you, Brad, so much for agreeing to come on.
Well, thank you for asking me, Patriot. I've been following your work and really happy to be invited on your platform and have this conversation.
Awesome. So for those in the audience who aren't familiar with your work, and it's probably relatively few, but just to kind of set the table, could you provide just a little bit of background about, kind of your own personal journey, how you gravitated in the direction you did? Because I think it's important for people to hear stories, of individuals like yourself, especially people like yourself who have really emerged as leaders in terms of exposing the truth. So, how did you discover your calling, and when did you become aware that, that your passion was leading you in a very different direction than everybody else? And how have you been able to overcome all of the resistance and all of the ignorance to the truth? Because you've been involved in this for quite some time. So what can you say on that topic? What have you encountered over the years?
Well, in the more recent years, in the last decade, I've been working on a 3-book series on esoteric subjects. The latest, Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet, just came out, but Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric came out in 2014 and 2013 and have since gone into second editions and audiobooks, and they've done really well because I think people are yearning for the truth. And what esoteric means are subjects that have been largely withheld from the greater amount of humanity and collected and known by a select few, who we might refer to as cabal or deep state, and years past the Illuminati. These secret societies or mystery schools of old have always known a lot of this material that they kept from the rest of us. And now, with so much information being available on the internet, it is an opportunity, in my case, to codify and collect all these data points and put them into this book series. And people have been very responsive to it. I was a travel writer before that. I did sacred places tour guide books, and I've traveled around the world. I've been to all 7 continents, including Antarctica, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And just by having a world view and spending several years overseas, that has also given me a perspective that I think has worked well in this esoteric series of books.
Well, I have to say, I've been reading your book. I'm not all the way through because I'm a relatively slow reader, especially when it's material that I'm really interested in. And when I looked at the table of contents in your book, I was just blown away of how many subjects there are and how knowledgeable you are on so many different things. And, during this time period when so many people, like you said, are awakening to the truth, and they're going through a process of discovery, I think it's vital for people to understand, how other people have transcended the mind control and the programming and really embraced their faith in the truth, which fuels their courage to go forward and try to expose the truth and talk about the truth, regardless of, the fear of the consequences of it. And actually, it's kind of a nice segue, because I know one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about tonight was MK Ultra, because I know you're very knowledgeable. You actually have a chapter in your latest book. Am I correct? There is a chapter in there on MK Ultra, and the origins, the objectives, the tactics, the secrecy surrounding the program. And then, and you mentioned Antarctica because, I'm thinking that maybe that could lead us into a discussion about the lesser known historical truths of World War II, particularly how it didn't really end the way we were taught, and how the mystery of Antarctica ties into where we find ourselves now. But before we get into Antarctica, what can you tell us about MK Ultra, particularly the origins of the program? I know there's a lot of things you could talk about, but and how it coincided with Project Paperclip. Just kind of give us an overview.
Well, MK Ultra is mind control, and it largely came over from the Paperclip Nazis after World War II. As we know, Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth and other rocket scientists came over to start NASA. You also had characters like Reinhard Gehlen, who really should have been at Nuremberg on war crimes, come over and help start the CIA with the Dulles brothers. And you also had the psychiatrists that were working on mass psychosis in Nazi Germany under Goebbels to get the people to go along. And it was even brought up in the Nuremberg trials with Hermann Göring, who said it's quite easy to bring the people into the fold. You basically sell them on the big lie and you keep repeating it big enough times and you can get the people to go along with it. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the general gist of it. So they already had a playbook ready to go, and it came over here post World War II. And this is the beginning of this neo-fascism that I describe in Beyond Esoteric. The first section of the book goes into this, including a chapter on MK Ultra. Well, MK Ultra also went into individualized mind control, using different drugs and other things like vaccines well, that was MK Naomi. But it's interesting that MK is the German spelling of mind control, Kontrolle. So the Germans have had a role in this neo-fascism, including this way to influence a large society. For many years, I lived in San Francisco, right on the edge of the Presidio. I did a video on YouTube. It's gotten thousands of views about the underground Presidio. And they were doing a lot of MK Ultra experiments there, as well as in downtown San Francisco. They had a flop house, and the CIA had one-way mirrors, and they would hire a prostitute to go out and get an unsuspecting victim, and then they would get the prostitute to either share some drugs with this person or sometimes slip them a Mickey, so to speak, and put it in their drink to see how people would respond. And look, there was a lot of drugs going around in the 60s in San Francisco, the whole summer of love. Isn't it interesting that all of a sudden the anti-war movement all of a sudden became peace, love, and rock and roll? That's because they were flooded with LSD, which was not made illegal until 67. And characters like Owsley, who had sheets and so much LSD, he could have dosed everybody in the entire country. This guy never got caught, never got busted, but was able to sell and distribute huge amounts. And now it's pretty well understood that he was being supplied through these MK Ultra programs because they wanted to get people off the idea of protesting the war. So there's just these little things that come in with MK Ultra that just make it so devious, and so the way they can steer the narrative and get people off the subjects they don't want to has been quite successful program. And a lot of Americans had no idea that we have been psychologically operated on for decades.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because that was actually my next question. So knowing all the things you know about MK Ultra, because we could do an entire show on that.
Yeah.
What were in your view, I mean, what were the key elements that enabled this program and all of its offshoots, that you mentioned in your book, like MK Naomi and others, to achieve such success in terms of their objective, which of course was control of the individual's mind, and really by extension, it was the control of information and hence public opinion. But, even after all the details started to come out, in the church committee hearings, 1975, I believe.
That's right.
But still in all, the public just really remained in the dark. It seemed that nobody really kind of woke up at that point. I mean, I guess some people did, but a lot of these details came out. So how were they able to keep this going? I mean, and that's the thing. This is why, for me, this is such an important topic, because I don't think a lot of folks realize that MK Ultra is kind of the world that we live in, the world that they've constructed. It's not just a historical event. It's a program that's been ongoing. So How do you think they've been able to pull this off?
Well, the other part of it is the greatest psyops that has ever been inflicted on not only the citizens of America, but really around the world, and that is the mass media. And we know that the CIA had their operatives in all the media companies well back into the 1950s. This also came out in the church hearings that Operation Mockingbird had quite a few people steering the narrative. Now it's known as the 4 a.m. talking point. So that's every morning at 4 a.m. Langley, Virginia is pumping out the news stories for the day on the fax machines at all the desks of the mainstream media. And look, the mainstream media is owned and operated by the globalists. So if you really want to get your information, a worldview as they want you to think, then have at it, because that's what it is. And I suspect, Patriot, that's why shows like yours have really taken off, and you've gained the audience that has turned away from the mainstream media because people just don't believe it anymore. And I do think people are waking up. And although this has been a very concerted psyops for many years, decades, we're coming out of it now and we're seeing it. And it is trauma-based mind control in some cases. I mean, in the extreme, what they're doing to some of these victims in San Francisco and elsewhere was to fracture their memory. Because if you shock and you put someone in extreme pain, they have moments of forgetfulness. So this was the whole idea of the Manchurian Candidate, is having someone who would know what's going on, what the game plan is, but if they were captured and were put into torture, that they would shut down. And to some degrees it was successful. But when it went out to all the rest of us, that's when it became very dubious. That's when it became fascist form of informing the public.
Absolutely. So connecting the dots. All right. So how has MK Ultra, this programming, contributed to the mass formation psychosis that we see evident in the public's reaction to COVID and to the jab? I mean, do you see a connection there between, the history of MK Ultra, how they've really conditioned society, really primed the pump, so to speak, and then, used all the fear, that fear frequency that they've created over all these years through the mass media, like you just talked about? Do you see the connection there between that and the mass formation psychosis, with, and the obvious example in COVID in terms of how it's expressing itself?
Well, it's a casebook example, Patriot. Look, real pandemics don't require exaggerated virus models. They don't require faulty testing kits. They don't require rigged results and falsified death certificates, but psychological operations do. And this is the coup de grace of psyops on the American people.
It really is. It really is. It's absolutely massive. And to me, it's just, I talk about this a lot on my show. It's stunning to witness, even at this stage, how many people you see. In my area, I'm in the Northeast, and very, very liberal area. You still see people walking around in the middle of nowhere with 2 masks on, driving around by themselves with 2 masks on. But the good news is I'm also seeing more and more people now that we're sort of in the second wave of this whole COVID thing. And I don't want to get too much into COVID because I really want to talk to you about Antarctica. But while we're on the subject, I am seeing a lot of people. Now, this second time around, probably about 50% of the people are just ignoring the mandates at this point, which I think is a really good indicator, barometer of how things have changed in the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And in that year, so many more people have just started to come over to our side and see it for what it really is. I mean, there's an old saying that the American people won't do anything until they really feel the pinch. And we're starting to feel the pinch. And look at gases practically doubled in a year. And now supermarket shelves are starting to go bare. And we're sensing that there is something big at hand. And this is taking down this satanic globalist elite, which has been in control for thousands of years. an example I give is just think in the time of the pharaohs, the ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was a living god. He was revered as such. He was a man like you and me, but he was a god to everybody else. Then the Roman Empire took over the whole Mediterranean basin and beyond. The Caesar was a living god, and he was treated as such. Now you have the Pope in Rome who has an ear to God. So all the while we've been told what we should think, what we should do, how we should act, how we can make money and spend money and live, work, produce and consume, this whole cradle to grave programming. And I think in a way, this is part of the MK Ultra psyops, is to get us to just be good little sheeples and go along. Look, even John D. Rockefeller, who was funding all the medical schools, he says, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of people who follow orders. So this has been the globalist mindset for a long time. And the fact that so many people are now bucking that trend and reversing their way of thinking, even in these last few months or year, to me is very encouraging that we're going to defeat these guys, and then we can move on to this golden age, this great period of human peace and awakening, when we can have our Star Trek future, which right now has been robbed from us.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Okay, well, that's actually a good pivot point. So let's get into Antarctica, because I know that you are an expert on really all the covert activity, the mystery surrounding Antarctica, to which all roads seem to lead at this point. Everyone seems to be talking about Antarctica more and more when they're attempting to discover and to understand all that's been hidden from us, historically, politically, technologically, since World War II and even before. But, you could, I'm sure, go back way before World War II. But not only, I know that you've visited the continent, because I've listened to you talk about that, and you have a lot of insights to share. So in order for folks to better understand what's going on there and how Antarctica is really fundamentally important to our liberation, like we were talking about here, why don't we begin with sort of the hidden history of World War II, particularly the truth about what transpired at the end of the war with all of the top-level Nazis when they should have been facing justice at Nuremberg. And then we can kind of connect the dots between what you've already talked about in terms of Project Paperclip, and even talk about Operation Highjump as well.
Sure, you bet. Well, just keep in mind, I think it was Napoleon that said, history is written by the winners. So the history that we get out of World War II is highly sanitized at best, but outright lies in reality, as far as the German surrender, what they did post-war, and their influence on the world as well, including their New Berlin base down in Antarctica, also known as Base 211. And I do know where that's located, in the New Schwabenland area. They basically went down there in the 1930s, 38, 39, on a ship called Schwabenland. And there is an area of Germany called Swabia. So it was named after an area in the country. And a lot of high-ranking Germans were part of the operation to claim what is now known as Queen Maud Land. So on a globe, if you look directly below South Africa, which had been an apartheid country and sympathetic to Nazi Germany, so it was a good final supply depot for ships and submarines going down there. Well, they did an expedition in 38, and they dropped these Nazi, the meter-long darts with a flag on it. I guess that, to them, justified their land claim down there. And they took a large swath of land. They also discovered that there was this area that they named the Schumacher Ponds, that were geothermal lakes that never froze, even in the cold of winter. So the name was derived from the pilot who landed a water plane on the Schumacher Ponds and stayed behind and did some experiments and showed that it was geothermically heated, while the inland crew left for about a week, and they came back and they discovered the network of tunnels under the ice. Now, keep in mind, Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world, 91 known volcanoes. And when I was down there, I'll tell you a little bit about our trip in a
Please.
little bit. We visited a volcano, an active volcano called Deception Island. And the Nazis discovered this too. So think about what would happen with geothermal activity. 2 miles of ice over the polar plateau in eastern Antarctica. With volcano activity, you have the propensity for very large under ice domes. Of course, the Germans were also very skilled at creating deep underground military bases. It was the TOT organization, TODT, named after one of the leading engineers. And that's how they created Fortress Europe with all the bunkers and garrisons all around the northern part of Europe. Well, they did the same in Antarctica, to the point where Admiral Dönitz, who was in charge of the Navy and was actually the Fuhrer for the last week in the war, he stated in 1943, "We have created for the Fuhrer an impregnable fortress in a landscape of ice." Again, I'm paraphrasing, but basically describing Antarctica, an impregnable fortress. And so this then leads to Operation Highjump, which happened after the war, 1946, 47. See, all the seasons, of course, are backward there. And I went down there exactly 3 years ago. We were on the Drake Passage right around now, and it's high summer down there. So it's the best time to go.
Yeah, it's between November and March, you said, right? That's the only time you can go.
As a tourist traveler, yeah. They do have some bases that stay occupied year round. And in the winter, there's only 1,000 people on the whole continent, the 5th largest continent in the world, and there's only 1,000 people.
Wow.
So one of the impressions I got down there is there's just so much space, so much land, so much. I mean, it's frozen. It's not very easy to live there, but
I love the story you told about the blue ice too. Not to sidetrack you from Operation Highjump, but that was a great story. If you want to relay that,
should we go into Highjump and go through the
yeah,
history?
we can do that. I won't derail you. Sometimes my mind can go in a million different directions. Go ahead.
We got a lot of cool stuff to talk about, so we'll get through it all.
Absolutely.
So Operation Highjump was led by the Admiral Byrd, one of the most decorated and experienced polar explorers, not only of Antarctica, but also the Arctic region too. And he was also a aviation expert. He was a pilot. And he was the one who found the massive hole under the ice near the South Pole. And we can get into that a little bit too. And there absolutely is a huge no-fly zone right around there. But Admiral Byrd saw it, and it was so big that he dipped his plane into the hole, circled around, saw some incredible things, and then flew back out and wrote about it in his diary, which the family still owns and hasn't.
Now, this was a hole actually in the ice. So he flew down into the ice, right? Or it wasn't. Okay. So I'm just trying to get a visual in my mind. So he's flying his plane and he sees an actual hole beneath him and he flies down into the hole.
Yep.
Right. And then he does a kind of circles around and then flies back out.
Yep. And up at the South Pole, it's over 2 miles thick of ice. The polar plateau is just a massive amount of ice. So whether that hole was formed through volcanism, geothermal vent, or just some great opening up there, but I suspect that's why we have the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station right there at 90 degrees south. The hole is at 89 degrees. And that's where Prince Harry went cross-country skiing with all his army buddies back in 2015, 2016, when all the elites were going down there.
So interesting.
The Illuminati Disneyland is one of the nicknames for some of the things that they were going down there to see. So back to Highjump. You got one of the biggest armadas of Allied ships heading down to Antarctica in 46, led by Admiral Byrd, with aircraft carriers, submarines, battle.
This wasn't just the U.S., right? This was other countries as well, right?
Other countries that were allied with us in the war were part of it as well.
Okay.
And they came down in 2 groups, one from the Pacific side, one from the Atlantic. They met in Little America, which was also founded by Admiral Byrd. and then went up to confront the Nazis in New Schwabenland. And the history that I've been privy to comes out of Russia, because right after the Cold War, well, when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed, you could go to the Soviet Union in Moscow with a case of hard currency, not rubles, but dollars or other currencies, and you could buy a whole bunch of secrets. And so Russia has their autopsy video of aliens. They have crash disk video that has been released since then, and a whole lot more, including what they knew about Antarctica. And they've even put out a documentary. It's in Russian with subtitles, but it's very, very interesting, the history of
I'd
Antarctica.
love to see that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's great. I think if you did a keyword search for Russian documentary Highjump, it would probably come up. Because in the documentary, they say very matter-of-factly that craft came up out of the water and attacked the Armada. We could do nothing to shoot those craft down. They were described as dish-shaped. They used their gravity deflection abilities of these craft to not only part the water when they came out, but also it's used is how they can fly these craft. So the Germans were very skilled at backward engineering UFOs and had been doing so for over a decade, since the early 1930s, when the first craft they recovered in the Black Forest, and then Mussolini turned over a nearly intact UFO from the Lombardy region in Italy over to the German scientists. So they had developed in the Skoda works very advanced dish-shaped craft. And a lot of that went to Antarctica at the end of the war, because when the Allies and, well, first Russia got to the Skoda works in what is now Czech Republic, there was nothing there and no scientists to be found, or if there were, they had a bullet in their head because maybe they didn't want to go to Antarctica. So they got the goods, and they kept the goods. And it's interesting that Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth, who said, we had help from the people above. How did we get so smart? Where did we get this technology? They even said it's alien technology, but they never went with the 0 point craft, the UFO type prototypes that the Nazis had worked with. And there were several types, including the Vril craft. And I have the blueprints for the Haunebu, several versions of the Haunebu craft that were recovered were actually, it was a data dump to this researcher in London in the late 1980s. And he just put it all out as is. And we've got incredible blueprints, plans, photographs, testimony, all kinds of information.
Yeah, wasn't there an interesting story about how those surfaced in, I was listening to David Hatcher Childress, he was talking about how that surfaced. Yeah, that was a very interesting story. But so you're saying that during Highjump, did the craft that appeared from the ocean, were they the Haunebu craft or the Vril, or were they different?
Unknown. Some researchers also may say they could have been reptilian craft, because the Germans were allied with them to a degree in World War II. Why they let them lose, I'm not really sure. But dish-shaped craft, probably similar to this. And what's also interesting too is that a few years later, remember the lights over the Capitol?
That was 53, right? Or 52?
Yep.
Something like that.
Most researchers today would say those weren't alien craft at all. Those were the Antarctica Nazis flying over our most restricted airspace to send a lesson. Look, we can come and get you at any time and you can't do anything about it. And that is also part of the reason why we fell into this neo-fascism. Yeah, that was 52, just a few years after Highjump. So we went down there to knock out the New Berlin base. And the first day they flew a sortie over and dropped a couple light bombs. They found where it was. The next day they sent the big bombing fleet, and everything just went off the radar screen. Those planes and pilots have never, ever been heard from since. And then shortly thereafter, the Battle of Highjump ensued, where these craft come out of the water. they could have wiped out the whole fleet, but they just took out one ship. This, according to the Russian documents, interestingly called the USS Murdoch. And it was also the USS Murdoch, which was bombed in the false flag in that started the Vietnam War in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So maybe these names get recycled around somehow,
Yeah,
or they use them when they.
I bet they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get a little bit lazy every now and then.
And
so they took
Bird
out one
had
of
to go
these.
back. Yeah, Bird just came back with his tail between his legs, but he did mention to a Chilean journalist who was there on the boat when they were refueling also in Chile, and the journalist went out and published a story that quoted Bird as saying, I don't want to scare people, but we're going to be confronted with an enemy that has the ability to fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. And Patriot, as far as I know, they have not revealed any kind of craft that can fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. Not
Nope.
that it doesn't exist, and I think it does, but
yeah, oh yeah,
they ain't telling us about it.
wow. So he spoke to a Chilean media, and then he came back to the U.S. and they throw him in prison for a little while and just to kind of shut him up, and then he ended up getting out.
Yeah, they're gonna do what they did to Forrestal and call him crazy and throw him out a window if he didn't shut up. So he wised up, but he still died under somewhat mysterious circumstances. One of the most decorated admirals we've ever had. So it's really sad to see people like Forrestal, who said he's going stark raving mad talking about aliens in the Pentagon. And so they had to quiet him up because he wouldn't shut up on his own. And so Forrestal is considered the first casualty in the embargo on truth. And that's another section in Beyond Esoteric called Embargo, about all the subjects that have been withheld from us through many of these programs.
So you're of the opinion then that all of this technology came from non-terrestrial treaties and allegiances that the Nazis made prior to the war. Is that correct? For the most part?
For the most part. Let's not discount their engineering abilities to take something like a downed craft and backward engineer it. And if we can even take another step back, there was the Vril Society right after World War I in a Bavarian hunting lodge who were psychic mediums. Sigril was one, and Maria Orsic. These women, they grew their hair very, very long. And they were in the 1920s psychically, telepathically getting downloads of very high-tech equipment that they were able to actually give to engineers to start crafting. So it was probably a multi-pronged approach to gaining this kind of technological advance. And look, at the very end of the war, the Allies were absolutely terrified that they were going to break out their wonder weapons and just annihilate them all. And they were very, very close to detonating a nuclear bomb, if not the first. Those scientists came over as paperclip scientists and worked on the Manhattan Project to develop the nuclear bombs for the US that got dropped on Japan.
Okay. So all right. So what information then can you relate to the audience about which non-terrestrial groups were based in Antarctica from the time period, I guess, around Operation Highjump or after it up until this silent war, I think that we are both in agreement is going on to root them out of all of their DUMBs and all of these underground facilities. I mean, which groups were operational, and have they been giving orders to human leadership, and how long have these groups been down there according to your research? Because I know that there have been massively significant discoveries of entire cities, and we could talk about that as well, that, I've read were caused by some sort of a dramatic pole shift event where you had these entire cities flash frozen under the ice sheets. And I've also heard you speak about, and you actually mentioned it a little bit earlier, about the evidence of geothermal activity in Antarctica, which would make living conditions quite comfortable underneath the ground. So, and of course, we know that Admiral Byrd spoke of anyway, ancient civilizations that had perhaps lived underground. So what can you tell us about that? I know it's kind of a loaded question, but. Figured I'd give you a lot to work with there.
Yeah, sure. Well, anytime we have a discussion about extraterrestrials or inner terrestrials who come from this earth and maybe earthborn themselves, like reptilians in underground bases, some of the older bases, which I call legacy bases, for example, Dulce, New Mexico, which is working in conjunction with some of these black programs, but it is a very old base. My friend Anthony Sanchez wrote a great book called UFO Highway, and he was describing back in the time of the mounted cavalry in this country going up to the Archuleta Mesa and finding the cave entrance. And it was just a slaughter of Indians who had fought in this cave and were always wiped out. So reptilians have been here on this continent for a long time. The gray aliens, they're all manufactured, they're all test tube, and they largely work under, let's just call it a pecking order or a totem pole with the reptilians on top, giving the orders, and there's several different kind of species of reptilians. And I go into this quite in depth in my book, Future Esoteric, all things extraterrestrial and flying crafts and so forth. So the Germans allied with them, malevolent ETs, who we are warned about. Even Eisenhower was warned, don't go with those bad ones. It's not going to work out too well. Fortunately, he did not heed the warning, and we did. And that's where the Dulce base, and also working with them in Area 51 and other locations.
I've read they kind of did it behind Eisenhower's back too. They went ahead and made these treaties in a large way behind his back. Yeah.
And Eisenhower even threatened to take the army into the Nellis Air Force range, which contains Area 51 and S4, which, by the way, you can go on Google Earth right now and see S4, where Bob Lazar worked. Similarly, there's another location in New Schwabenland. One of Dr. Micah Sala's whistleblowers came out and said, you can now look at this area that has all these straight lines. It's still a blurry picture. We'd like to see the resolution better on that. But look, Mother Nature does not create in perfect symmetry, does not create perfect pyramids, does not create perfect right angles, doesn't create these long straight lines that look like runways or rectangular buildings. Mm-hmm. So when you see that, it certainly raises an eyebrow that there was something down there. And then there's also this other base, a seasonal base in the New Schwabenland claim. I talk about it in my presentation, The Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica, that I give at conferences around the country. And
it was awesome, by the way. Love that.
No, thank you. Yeah, Contacting the Desert just released the version that I gave last spring, which would have been live, but everything went virtual. But there's this massive craft under the ice, and in 2013 they were excavating it, and you can see it, and it's a half a kilometer long. It looks like a giant grill, but there's another section where it appears they got down in there. And Patriot, I love it when I can get confirming data points. And so the Farsight Institute are remote viewers, and they remote viewed the Conan base and found that it is a massive machine, most of it hidden under the ice. And I do believe that is one of the three, Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, named by our intelligence agencies, decades ago, that the three ships of Columbus's voyage, they nicknamed the three big craft in Antarctica, Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. And I believe that the Nazis discovered this too, that they had seen this thing, and that might have also aided them in their backward engineering of this technology.
I've also heard the Anshar also mentioned as well in the context of Antarctica. So how do they fit into all this?
Well, the malevolent ETs, if you wanted a place to hide out, and this was an impression I got when I was down there, that there are only two places on this planet right now that are largely still unexplored, and that is the deepest depths of the ocean and what is under the ice in Antarctica. And if you want a place to hide, as we said, there is a propensity for these very large under ice domes to be formed through the geothermal activity. Well, the reptilians are reportedly have been down there for many centuries. This is another one of their legacy bases. So maybe they were waving the Germans in saying, hey, we got this area here where you can set up camp like us and we'll work together with you. And in my presentation, I show what Antarctica looks like without the ice. And there are fjords in that continent that go for hundreds of miles. So if you know what you're doing in some of those U-boats, and those are some of the most intrepid sea explorers history has ever known, going into those fjords hundreds of miles into the Antarctic interior, and then finding perhaps some of these large caverns or pre-existing antediluvian civilizations. There have been other people in the UFO community who said they have been down there and they have seen some of these very large cities under the ice, and their factories, and they're using the geothermal activity as a power source, as a heat source,
Wow.
and fresh water too. So think about it. It's not too inconceivable that civilizations could hide down there under the ice, as well as perhaps ET civilizations.
Yeah, I've even heard it referred to as Middle Earth.
Yeah.
That it's like an entirely different realm under there. So are the Anshar, are they reptilian? Because I'm still learning a little bit more about this, so forgive me for not knowing that. But the Anshar, are they? You mentioned the reptilians, and I'm trying to get all the different groups straight in my head.
Yeah, I do believe they're an aspect of them. There's also the Dracos, and they come from. Isn't it interesting that we use the word draconian,
Hmm.
and the Draco star system is largely where they come from in the Orion group,
Hmm.
and so there are allied groups of these malevolent ETs, which are kind of like locusts in our universe, and go around to different solar systems and find emerging or vulnerable civilizations or planets that they wish to exploit, and they do that. So we really do live in a universe of duality. There is good and there is bad, but just like on this planet, by far more people are good than want to do you harm. And I think that's also true with the extraterrestrial groups. By far more are good, but they largely operate by the prime directive, which is a law, cosmic law,
Hmm.
popularized in Star Trek, that emerging civilizations such as ours need to be hands off. But here's the workaround. If those ETs, such as the reptilians, are Earth born themselves, interterrestrials, well, they have a right to be here too, because this is technically their planet as well. But see, they have been so manipulating of humans because they have abilities as ultra terrestrials that we can't even wrap our head around, plus technology beyond our wildest dreams. Although we're playing catch up and getting to the point where we can perhaps go head to head with them technology wise, they still have abilities such as we've heard of shape shifting and phasing in and out of our reality. And I do talk about that in my book, and show some examples of not only Illuminati rituals, but magicians of old. What are these guys summoning up here? We've probably seen that picture on the
Yeah.
internet before.
Hmm.
And other people like magicians, but also pictures in the Bible and other accounts of extraterrestrials in so many different ways. And almost always they are these malevolent types. The good ones, we could think of them as angels. The bad ones, we could think of them as demons. So this narrative is really a lot older than people realize, or all of this stuff starts to add up when you put
Yeah.
it together in those terms.
Yeah, that's one of the things that blew my mind when I was talking to Gene Decode about this issue in general, just trying to understand the history, trying to piece together as much as we can about what we know about history, and to have always existed in the bubble of thinking that creation here on this planet was the first creation, and that there was nothing that came before us. And how much we've been led to believe um, that that we were the sort of the alpha and omega of it all. and we're coming to understand that it's not quite that simple. Now, I'm very interested in the indigenous groups. Are there any other groups that you've heard that might be indigenous? I've heard the Vril, perhaps, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the Vril and their connection to cloning as well.
Great question. Well, let's define our terms here. The Vril was the Vril Society of post-World War I German psychics who were getting downloads from the Aldebaran star system, which were benevolent ETs and very human-like. Perhaps at the time in 1920 Germany, it looked like they could become a power of good. Even Hitler created the Autobahn and did a lot of good things before he went psycho with the war machine. And it could have turned out quite differently had they not been warlike. They could have really been what they wanted to be, which was like this master race and aided with benevolent ETs. So the Vril Society was tapping into that. In fact, some of the craft that the German scientists created were called Vril craft. And they also spoke of the Vril energy, an energy source. They use the term techno magic. That it's kind of like the Arthur C. Clarke quote that when we're confronted with technology beyond our imagination, we think of it as magic because we just don't know how it's done, right?
Right.
And so they were tapping into this techno magic, this Vrilia energy. But then there's also these little creatures that also got the name Vril that are tiny little reptiles that go into the eye. And that's where you see all these elite with the black eyes, that they may have been doing this ritual. And then once they're in the body, they change the person's personality. All of a sudden they become highly sexualized, often bisexual. They just start doing things. They just party a lot. And it makes them more subservient to their master. So perhaps this is also a way that these reptilian creatures, and I use that kind of an umbrella term for a lot of different species on this totem pole, but certainly the winged Draco Prime are considered the very top of that totem pole, and they're the ones.
Are they like the lighter skinned creatures?
Correct. They're white.
Yeah. White skin, yeah.
Kind of like how, just think about how our hierarchies are like a pyramid. You have the Pope at the top of the Vatican, and then some bishops below him, and then the whole hierarchy below them. Governments in this country work that same way too, and also learning institutions. So we're very hierarchy minded, and I think that is one of these results of being influenced by these malevolent ETs for all these years, is they want us to think how they think so they can control us easier.
Now, when you were in, I know this is slightly switching gears, but I want to, ask you this question. When you were in Antarctica, how close did you get? I know you were in the South Shetland Island area, right? Primarily, or
that's where we first landed.
Okay. And how close can you get to the New Schwabenland, that whole secret area? I mean, how close can one actually get? I mean, I know you said there are some who claim they've been down there, but how close were you able to get?
Well, let's keep in mind Antarctica is a very big continent, 5th largest in the world. So the distances are very vast. Now, I have talked to an adventure travel company who assures me they can get me there. Because I had a film crew come up after one of my talks at a conference and says, we want to do a whole series on Antarctica. All right, great. Come up with a budget and I can set the itinerary, and where I'd go is New Schwabenland. So I talked to this adventure travel company, both in Puerto Arenas, Chile, and they also have offices in Salt Lake City, Utah, and had an idea of where I wanted to go. The Schumacher Ponds, for example, and then up to the Hoffman Mountain Range, where I think the New Berlin base is located. And they assured me they could get us there. So there's a bit of a misnomer that it's all off limits, that you can't go anywhere. They say they can fly you there with a budget, with enough money, and the time to go right now. in the right season. But where I went was just the Palmer Peninsula. So you know how South America kind of sticks down like a little finger,
Hmm.
Terra del Fuego, and then up comes the Palmer Peninsula.
Yes.
So in between there is the Drake Passage, and that is the stormiest seas in the world. It's where the Atlantic and the Pacific converge below Cape Horn, and an upwelling of nutrients from the saltier northern oceans combining with the cold fresh water from the melting of the glaciers just creates a very stormy seas. And of course, going down there, most of our crew, including myself, got violently seasick.
Oh.
I mean, the barrier of entry was very high on this trip, and it was fraught with danger. I mean, if you went overboard, you're dead in minutes. So anytime we were doing watch, because we had to watch out for icebergs, we had to wear a strap and a vest to keep us in case we fell overboard. So we only ventured to first the South Shetland Islands, to King George Island, laid anchor, and went ashore to a Polish base. It was 11 Poles, including the captain, sub-captain, cook, and some of the crew. Well, we were all crew, really. They considered everybody had to help out in certain ways, most being on watch or with big poles to push away. The growlers is the name for these icebergs that could do some damage. So we just wanted to keep them away when we were navigating through iceberg fields. So every day, once we got down there, it was
Sounds very treacherous.
Oh man, it was. And
Wow.
when we were going through that storm, my girlfriend, she thought we were goners. I said, her bunk was right above mine, and we were both violently ill. We couldn't even get up to do watch or eat or do anything. I mean, the biggest chore of the day in those days going down there was just making our way across, getting out of the bunk, getting to the bathroom, sitting down and doing your business, meanwhile puking in the sink. I mean, that's how it was for the first 3 days.
Well, it's a good thing the captain didn't get seasick on you.
It really is.
Otherwise, you really would have screwed, huh?
Emily thought we would just turn back. Let's just call this off. And I said, look, as long as the boat doesn't take on water, we're going to get through it. And it was a good boat, and it never took on water. And we got there. And then once we were there, so then there's all these islands, really amazing islands, including this Deception Island, which has had a lot of UFO sightings. It is the sunken caldera of a volcano and a ring of volcanic mountain all the way around. Last went off in the late 1960s and wiped out a bunch of bases there, including an old whaling station where we went ashore. And I had a Lonely Planet book. Can you believe it? 256 pages travel guide to Antarctica. And I'm reading about Deception Island. It's like, oh, there's a hot spring here, you guys. So me and the two other Americans, we went ashore and we found it. And had the tide not been coming up right at that moment, we could have stripped down naked and taken a hot spring right there in Antarctica.
Wow.
A lot of cool, weird stuff like that. But we eventually did touch ground on the Palmer Peninsula and visited 6 different bases, including the British base called Port Lockroy, which was set up to spy on the Nazis. And David Hatcher Childress talked about that in his lecture, including another base called Vernansky, which is now run by the Ukrainians, but was originally a British base, also part of this program to watch and see what the Nazis were doing. On the other side of the Palmer Peninsula, there's a big ice sheet, and then there's New Schwabenland. So probably about 700 to 1,000 miles away from where we were is where the Nazis were setting up shop.
Wow. So now, is it your understanding that the Alliance has been in the process of really systematically isolating and attacking and rendering all of these underground dumps and facilities inoperable, along with all the non-terrestrial groups? I mean, I know I asked you about the Vril. I mean, that's a whole other subject we could get into. I know I just want to pick your brain on so many different subjects, but I've heard they're one of the groups that are indigenous down there, and that they're basically going after all of these groups underground. I mean, that's what I've been talking about with Gene. Yeah. Are you in agreement with that?
I sure am. I'm a big fan of Gene Decode too. I've not spoken to him like you have, but I do follow his work. And isn't it interesting that a lot of these earthquakes, including
Mhm.
several in the South Shetland Island group going up towards South America. We're at the same depth, 10 kilometers down,
Mhm.
and 4.5 to 6.0 on the Richter scale.
Mhm.
And when you line them up, as Gene does so masterfully, you can see where some of these underground tubes go, and they have the ability to travel at Mach 2 speeds. That's twice the speed of sound on these maglev trains
Mhm.
to get around the world. I describe it in one of my chapters in Beyond Esoteric, and also in Future Esoteric, a chapter on underground bases.
Well, every
That
time you say something, I feel like I could ask you 10 more questions. That's, but I'll stick to Antarctica. Okay. So now that we've sort of laid the historical groundwork, that let's kind of fast forward a little bit and discuss Solar Warden and the secret space program. And also, I want to hear your thoughts on the Nazi presence on the moon, um, and really the importance of how Antarctica ties into all this. Because I have a few questions which will hopefully illuminate for the audience exactly why Antarctica is so critical to our liberation. So, um, first, can you convey your knowledge of how the publicized moon landing in 1969 was not humanity's first trip there, and what U.S. astronauts did discover when they went there that's been kept secret all this time, and kind of maybe go from there?
Sure. Well, not only were the Nazis backward engineering these Honeyboo and Vril craft with applications for war, even though they didn't really see much action, although they were spotted over the Battle of Kursk in 1943 outside of Moscow, the largest tank battle in history. There were reports that they were using some of the discs for reconnaissance, but they really didn't want that technology to fall into the Soviets' hands. So they're very careful not to engage too much with those. But they did have the other application of taking astronauts off planet. If history were really to be written correctly, and Voltaire said history is the Mississippi of lies, that we really don't know what we don't know, kind of thing,
Isn't that the
uh,
truth?
that these craft also have the ability to go off planet. So if history were really written correctly, yes, the Germans were the first to the moon. And indeed, on the dark side of the moon is a base in the shape of a swastika. Even Bill
Mhm.
Cooper talked about this. He came out of naval intelligence, and he was saying that's the Luna base. And that was originally built by the Germans with help from reptilians and other um, malevolent ET forces. They put it in the shape of swastika. It's still there. The US has since taken over or worked with it. You mentioned Solar Warden. That is one of our secret space programs that is in operation still to this day. But there are actually several different space programs. I have the great honor of being a moderator at conferences for the super soldier panels who talk about their 20 and back, quite matter of factly, and working with some of these other space programs. Now, two or three of them are the corporations, much like the movie Avatar, where they just want to get out there and exploit anything they can. And they're trading in human resource. But the German secret space program is called Not Waffen. And I'm good friends with Penny Bradley. If anybody wants to look into her work, she's very prolific and with a near total recall of memory and working in the German secret space programs, which is still in operation, but they have taken quite a few blows, including their base in Antarctica. And just this last winter, Patriot, there was a huge exodus of German-speaking people coming through the American base McMurdo,
Mhm.
wanting to get off planet. Right around the time that Gene Decode was saying a lot of these, the underground tubes were being taken out, so they lost their escape route, and then they just showed up. They were kind of low level. I don't think they were the really important ones. But also this year, reports of Christine Lagarde and Charles Schwab going to nowhere else but Rothschild Island. Yes, there is a Rothschild Island, and it's right across.
Oh, we're going to talk about the names of the
Plateau.
islands later. I want to get your take on that later, but yeah.
A lot of weirdness there. Yeah. So then 2016, you got John Kerry going down there on election day. He flies into McMurdo, goes and disappears inland for a couple days, comes back to McMurdo and flies out. Buzz Aldrin was down there and tweeted, "We have seen the sight of evil and we're all in danger." I paraphrase again. That tweet got taken down right away, but he's never denied that it wasn't real. He's just never confirmed or denied. And I actually met Buzz Aldrin once at a travel conference. Yeah. And I kind of shadowed him for a good hour until he finally kind of looks up at me. This is tall guy following me around with these piercing blue eyes. And I said, "Buzz, is it true that on the return trip, the capsule was infiltrated with orbs, or they were following you guys around?" And he just was like, "How did you know that?" He didn't say it. He didn't confirm or deny, but I have a good sense of reading people. And I think he was pretty shocked that I brought that up. And
that's awesome.
You know, he can be a little testy. There are videos of him.
Oh yeah.
Of people going up with the Bible and say, "Do you swear on the Bible you went to the moon?" And he punches the guy down.
They're actually hysterical. I know. No, he's got a short fuse. I don't know. You're a big guy though, so you probably felt pretty comfortable.
I didn't get slugged.
Asking Buzz a question. So okay, so the secret space program. My understanding is that Solar Warden started out as the U.S. Navy's secret space program. Is that your understanding as well? Is that the origin of the program is? And I'm told really that the Navy has really always been the good guys. Within the military for the most part. There's been a large contingent of the military of the Navy that's really been on the good side. And you mentioned William Cooper. He was in the Navy as well.
Correct.
And he witnessed the craft coming out of the ocean, and that was back in the mid '60s, right?
Yep.
And I think there were about a dozen other people on board who also witnessed it. Okay. So the Navy, so that's how it started. And then, okay, so my question really was, how did the secret space program, or the different ones, because my understanding was there was one, the Army had one, the Navy had one, and the Air Force had one. And that they all kind of came under the umbrella of Space Force. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Did they more or less consolidate what that had been going on covertly for years under kind of a unified command structure? And how is that? How does that tie into Antarctica? Because I would imagine Antarctica would be vital to that for our defensive capacity in space.
Right, and as we know, the Space Force has just come about as the sixth force of our military might in the last few years, and that was a consolidation of a lot of the sometimes redundancies in the other space programs. But the Navy would always do things parallel with NASA. See, NASA was just the cover story. NASA was, we're flying these rockets up and
kid stuff.
Yeah, it's kid stuff. And they're like Roman candles, right? Compared to free energy, zero point.
What's really going on, yeah.
They're really good stuff that doesn't pollute, that can get us far distances out in the galaxy and certainly all around our solar system. But we have been under quarantine for quite some time. There is a feeling that as far as leaving our solar system, that we're just not prepared for it. Maybe we have gotten over that at the moment, but I remember reading this great article in Nexus magazine about 20 years ago describing the secret space program. And it was saying that to get to really distant locations, you have to get almost to the speed of light, 9/10 the speed of light. And at that point, and this goes into a lot of the Einstein theorems of space travel and time travel as well, they, it turns out, work pretty much hand in hand. In fact, when and the Germans were working on this as well with their Bell project, Die Glocke, and I have a picture of it in the book as well, that that you can also do time travel. This is what the Germans were doing way back in the late 1930s.
Oh, I'd love to talk to
Um,
you about time travel, but I won't even dare to bring that
yeah,
up right
that
now.
could,
We'll
again,
do
be a
that. We'll
whole
do that
show.
on another show, maybe.
So using this technology and getting up to 9/10 the speed of light, the astronauts, which were largely soldiers, right? All the moonshot guys, they were fighter pilots. They went through basic training. They knew how to shoot a gun. They're, typical jarhead military types. But it turns out if you want to go way far away at that speed of 9/10 speed of light, you turn into your light body. And only those of a Buddha nature, for lack of a better term, but someone who is very much like say enlightened can do this. So according to this Nexus article, our US space program, they would get these jarhead guys to do it. They'd get up and meet the conditions and they'd have the coordinates where they want to go, and they just hit a brick wall and just have to come back. And the astronauts have said, well, we're not really prepared in that kind of way to do this sort of travel. So I thought that was kind of interesting that we still have a lot to learn as far as becoming this Star Trek future, which by the way is humans 300 years from now. It was all predicated on peaceful humans exploring the universe for humanitarian means. And so Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the whole Star Trek series, in the 1950s, he was sitting in on Council of Nine seances and psychic mediums who were speaking to humans in our future, 350 years in the future. And this is what they were describing. This was our Star Trek future. Things like, you'll never see a single scene in Star Trek where money is exchanged, right? So money is just done away with. You ask for a chocolate shake and it comes out of the dematerializes, and there you have it. Yeah, and
wow,
we've obviously put an end to war. Earth is a peaceful planet. I thought it was interesting that San Francisco was Federation headquarters. In one of the Star Trek movies, they show it in a futuristic way, and ships taking off with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. So, and this is who we could be right now. This is our Star Trek future, but it has been robbed from us with the secrecy state that's not letting us know this information, that we have this technology to do it.
No, we actually have a fleet up there, though. Solar Warden is up there, and we're on the moon. They're preparing med beds on the moon. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any intel on that?
Well, that sure, and this is why I really enjoy being the moderator on these super soldier panels at conferences, because Randy Kramer, James Rink, others who have had limbs blown off, regenerated. So as you say, the med beds have this holographic technology, so they could scan the entire body and find every little virus or bacteria, germ that doesn't belong there. Every single pathogen can be extracted. That's why the ETs, who look very much human-like, they all look like they're supermodels in their 30s, and they can be hundreds of years old.
And are they the Palladians that you're referring to? Those ones?
Pleiadians,
Pleiadians,
Sirians, Octurians.
Mhm.
They were helping George Van Tassel create the Integratron down near Giant Rock in Joshua Tree here in California. And there were reports of people coming to drop off some stuff for George. Say, who are those tall guys wearing those funny jumpsuits? And they were human-like ETs who were helping him build this thing. Right around the time that George was about to get the Integratron working, the Men in Black came and sabotaged it. And those are, to my best estimation, I do a chapter in Future Esoteric on the Men in Black, are hybrids. So there has been a timeline to extract human DNA and mix it with ET DNA. And this is where it goes really deep, and it's quite interesting.
Ties into the Stargates as well, right?
Yes, and timelines. And I'm good friends with Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot. We've had long discussions on this, and many of her videos, including Dan Burish, who I quote in Future Esoteric quite extensively, talking about how important the timelines are for certain ET races right now. Because if things go wrong right now for them, they don't exist in the future. So they too are using time machine type technology to come back into this timeline to assure that their timeline exists. And I think that's why we have not seen the Dulce base go down yet, because there is quite a bit of genetic experimentation going on there. And I do describe it in Beyond Esoteric, including the Nightmare Hall, where a lot of abducted humans against their will end up in horrific situations. And there have been wars in the 1970s, the Dulce Wars, to try to free them, but our guys got slaughtered. One of the only survivors was Phil Schneider himself, who would speak at conferences and show his hands got hit by a laser beam, and he would even sometimes open his shirt up and show you how mangled his chest was, and somehow he survived. But as soon as he started going public and he had materials that he would show, extraterrestrial materials at the conferences, he didn't last very long, and he was suicided with a medical catheter wrapped around his neck and tied. You tell me, how can you possibly commit suicide that way? Well, that's what they said Phil Schneider did to himself. Interestingly, his valuables were still there, his money was still in his wallet, but all his conference material was gone, and he suicided himself. So back then in the 1990s, you get too close to this stuff and your life could be in danger.
Yeah, and Phil Schneider, he went underground and he went into a whole nest of them. Wasn't that the general the gist of the story I got, which I'm sure you know much more than I do, but that he went down there with a group of guys that hadn't really been briefed or trained on any kind of non-terrestrial presence even. I mean, he had said that he had a little bit of training, but the other guys had none. And he just, I think he said he had, a firearm on him, but they weren't prepared for any type of combat.
But it did kick off the Dulce Wars. And then so a lot of our special forces went in and they all got slaughtered.
Now, this was back in the 90s, you said, right?
I think he was killed in 95.
Oh, but the Dulce Wars were much earlier.
Right? I think in the 70s, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the Nightmare Hall. Strange account of Phil Schneider. I've got all that information on here. So let's see if I can find it real quick. But he was working on the deep underground military bases. Mm-hmm. And the Dulce Wars kicked off in, they were working with the ET since the 1940s. But I'm pretty sure it was in the 70s. Yeah, 79 was commissioned. Phil Schneider was commissioned as a Black Ops contractor to take part in a deep drilling operation near Dulce, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. During the sinking of the initial 4 shafts, it became clear that many of the lasers and mechanical components of the tunnel boring machine were coming up broken. Schneider and a few other geologists were elected to travel down the shaft, take a look and analyze the problem. Upon arriving at the bottom of the shaft, which was 4 kilometers deep, a horrible discovery was made. It became immediately apparent that they had broken through into a large cavern that was infested with aliens. The creatures were described as type 1 7-foot tall grays. Startled and fearing for his own life, Schneider was able to kill 2 of the creatures, but was hit by what he described as a light green cobalt radiation beam that was fired by one of the aliens. Badly injured and burned, but still alive, Phil was placed in an elevator basket and began the long trip to the surface. As the other armed men came down, an intense firefight continued to rage in the cavern below. A total of 60 Secret Service agents, members of the FBI and Black Berets were struck and killed by the aliens. So yeah, it was a slaughter, and this was the opening salvo of the Dulce Wars. And
And how long did that go on roughly? I mean, was it a couple of years or?
It was a couple of years. It also went over to the underground base around Area 51, and There it was triggered because one of the scientists didn't want to remove his firearms. And in a show of force, they killed this scientist, and then that triggered another confrontation. But I think we learned that they are way more advanced technologically than we are with weapons, and it was just a slaughter. So they struck an agreement, which was basically let these malevolent ETs do what they need to do, and that is what the whole cattle mutilation phenomenon's all about. And these 1,800-pound bulls are found up in the San Luis Valley. They don't do it much anymore. Now they just ship them livestock that gets down to them because they need to extract the red blood cells and the soft tissue. And so some of these cattle mutilations were found with laser precision operations, dropped from above with cracked branches in the snow and no footprints around. So the cattle mutes are one of the biggest mysteries. And isn't it interesting that Dulce, New Mexico is only about 150 miles away, where most of these cattle mutilations have occurred? And I'm good friends with Christopher O'Brien and Linda Moulton Howe, who were really on the forefront of examining this phenomenon and writing books about it. And then you have the human abduction elements, and a lot of those people say that they were experimented upon against their will and probed and sometimes left with a BB size monitoring device that they can't get out, that is actually it seems like it's AI, or it has some kind of sentience, because I was talking to Whitley Strieber about this because he had one, and it took several years to finally find a way to get it out. And they had to freeze it so it couldn't escape. And then they could go in with tweezers and pull it out. So yeah, there's technology here at hand that still is so strange, and we're still playing catch up to try to understand it. And that's why we have been so incredibly stunted from understanding all this. And that's why I call them esoteric subjects, because they have really been only a select few that knows what's going on with this stuff. And so we have just been so disadvantaged by not knowing, and just like a deer in the headlight when these people say they've been abducted, and then women continually probed, and they will impregnate women to about their second trimester, and then extract the baby, and then it'll grow up in a test tube. And these are the hybrids. This is who I think the Men in Black are. And the Men in Black had this uncanny ability to always show up right when somebody had a UFO sighting or experience. Before they could even pick up a phone and tell someone about it, the Men in Black were there, Johnny on the spot, to confront them, get rid of their evidence, and not to directly threaten them, but to telepathically scare the heck out of them to the point where they did shut up. And so this is how they basically controlled the UFO narrative for many decades. I've not heard of many Men in Black encounters in the last few years. Not to say that they are not there, but perhaps they've got bigger fish to fry, or they're trying to preserve their timeline, is what I think is really going on. And that's why Dulce Base has not been attacked yet. It's one of the last ones. And I'll tell you this, Patriot, if you ever hear about that earthquake 10 kilometers down in Dulce, New Mexico, do a fist bump, because that is the point where we probably have won the extraterrestrial war on this planet.
So that's the big one we're waiting for.
Yep.
Wow. This is amazing. So, all right. So we haven't really talked, we were kind of on the subject of Antarctica, but you mentioned we were talking a lot about UFOs. It all ties together. South America, huge hotbed. And that's also, we've been talking about, the Nazis, and that's kind of where we started this whole conversation. And by the way, I mean, it's amazing because most people think that we won World War II. And, so, I mean, I guess, when I think about it, I mean, well, let me ask you, would it be accurate to characterize or kind of define the Fourth Reich, as the sort of an unholy alliance between the SS top Nazi command and their Western sympathizers or allies, really, and the negative agenda aliens? And is that kind of the breakaway civilization that merged, where all these, Western powers became backed by these negative agenda types? Is that, and of course, all of their technology?
Very accurate.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And,
So,
and David Hatcher Childress, who you referenced his Antarctica presentations, good friend of mine. I went to his wedding and we've known each other for over 20 years. He is a book publisher, as am I. He's Adventures Unlimited Press. I'm CCC Publishing. But he did a great book on Antarctica called Dark Star, which was the Nazis going down to Antarctica and the help they got from the ETs. And in this book, the author describes the last battle of World War II, which again, history does not tell us because the Nazis won. And it was a submarine battle in the North Seas. And it was all the fleeing top level scientists and SS and Nazi hierarchy, including Hitler himself. And they routed the British, sunk many ships. They didn't want to be humiliated, so they left it out of the history books. But that was the last war in World War II. And all of those U-boats were headed straight on down to Antarctica. And they were the Fuhrer's convoy, they called it. And they had the really extra large submarines too, which were the transport submarines, the U-boats, which could very well have taken in parts a lot of the UFO technology out of the Skoda works. They knew in 1943 that the war was lost. And that's about the time when Martin Bormann, who is the money man, they started looting all of the wealth out of Europe. And there are still priceless artifacts and paintings which have never been recovered, as well as many metric tons of gold. And then, so Martin Bormann, the money man, he starts popping up all over South America in the 1950s. Yeah, he was supposedly killed at the end of the war. And he was actually put on trial in Nuremberg in absentium to try him. And he was found guilty and sentenced to death if they ever caught him. But he, like so many others, escaped justice, and they set up the Fourth Reich in America. Okay, we often think about the paperclip Nazis here and what they did, but also you have to understand, well, of course, South America is part of the Americas. They had sympathetic fascist leaders, Juan Perón in Argentina during the war, right afterwards, Pinochet, who has helped overthrow a democratically elected government in Chile by our own CIA. Kissinger used to brag about it, to install a fascist. Yeah, and so when I was in South America going down, I bought a car, I bought a Ford Expedition, and I drove it for 4 months and actually sold it in South America as well. But it was great because I could go anywhere I wanted, and I knew of a lot of places I wanted to go, including La Falda, which is right above Cordoba. Cordoba, Argentina was like the Detroit, Michigan to the fascist Nazis in the Fourth Reich. And it was their industrial hub. Had Perón and subsequent other dictators in Argentina not been kleptomaniacs, kind of like Marcos in the Philippines, these countries would have just been economic juggernauts. They would have been like Japan, but such wasn't the case. And there are other places such as San Carlos de Bariloche down in Patagonia, which I've been to Germany several times. Patriot, it's like you walk into a Bavarian town when you're in Bariloche, and they kept the money. The Germans are the richest people in South America, bar none. In fact, there's a joke in Argentina because almost all of their indigenous people in Chile and Argentina are lost. There's only about 1% of the population are indigenous. So the Argentinians have this joke, well, who are we? And they are largely Italians and Greeks and Southern Mediterranean Europeans that have many generations become Argentinians. So the joke is, we're Italians who speak Spanish and wish we were as rich as the Germans.
Yeah.
That's who the Argentinians are. So still to this day. And the other thing, Patriot, in
They got
Chile,
the loot out though. They got all the loot out.
the loot out. And get this, they bought enormous tracts of land down there. Enormous, like the size of some of our small states. And still to this day, they operate as micronations, that they just kind of run their own show and nobody's allowed in, and the government of the country can't control them. Just
and the local news down there, they report on the UFO sightings. That's the amazing thing. That was one of the things in David's presentation that I thought was just fascinating. There was one, it was a giant honeyboo crab. It looked like coming right out of a mountain in broad daylight.
Yep, and that's right near La Falda, and we went there and camped overnight, overlooking that famous mountain. And when I got back, David's got the funny voice. He's on Ancient Aliens all the time. He's like, well, Brad, all those UFO sightings, they weren't aliens. That's the German backward engineering base in that mountain. And I was like, really? Because I was reading The Lonely Planet about all these people that have been terrorized by alien sightings and abductions and burn marks in the ground. And that is not a characteristic of benevolent ETs. They do not leave burn marks, nor do they abduct. But the malevolent ETs do, and the backward engineered craft that came out of those mountains right around Cordoba, Argentina, according to Childress. And they were going to do an Ancient Alien episode on this, and he was going to go down there. Maybe they'd invite me to go too, because I've been there.
That'd be awesome.
There's a massive underground base in that mountain, he says, and it's near one of these big land holdings that nobody can get into. Nobody knows what it's all about. And interestingly, they speak German there.
What do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you know? Right.
Well, I could have had a V8.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Let's pivot back, because I wanted to ask you about the South Shetland, the names of the islands. We mentioned this earlier. So you got the Delta, the Omicron, you got Coronation, Deception. Then you mentioned Rothschild Island. Are there any others that I'm forgetting that have interesting names down there?
Rockefeller Plateau. That's where all the scientists went missing. That Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblower named Brian S., who was at Contact in the Desert the year I was a speaker there too. And he was coming out with his information with Linda, and they were sitting in a Mexican restaurant in Yucca Valley. And you can go back and listen to Linda's accounts of this. But when Brian S. went back to work or back home, he got a phone call, and they recounted the conversation over dinner. How they could have known that, maybe off of someone's phone, or they got listening devices from above. But they said, you better shut up, Brian S. But the cat was already out of the bag. So he was the one that put an X mark on the spot where the giant hole was near the South Pole.
Oh, wow.
He said that there was a lot of discs seen around the Beardmore Glacier. And that's also where her other whistleblower, Sparta 1 and 2, said there was an under ice craft near there. And then also was part of the rescue of these missing scientists who went out on the Rockefeller Plateau. They dropped them off, and there's really nothing there. It's just ice sheets as far as the eye can see. They just blink off the radar. Hey, where are you guys? They didn't pick up the phone. They didn't make a call. Brian S. was doing reconnaissance. They were looking for him for about a week. Then all of a sudden, we're here. Come and pick us up. Every one of them was just stone face, shocked. They wouldn't talk about what they saw. They just wanted to get the heck out of there. They got him out back to McMurdo and then in New Zealand. They put him in quarantine, and but they went missing for a week. And look, you cannot survive even in the summertime for a week without having supplies or gone missing somewhere, because they left their camp.
When was this?
That was on the Rockefeller Plateau in around the 2015, 2016 time frame, when a lot of the elites were going down there the first round.
So,
and those missing scientists, they were recovered, but wouldn't say what they encountered. I think they went underground to one of the bases and read the riot act to shut up.
Wow. All right. So in terms of the names of the islands, I mean, coincidence that they're named after the the Delta, the Omicron, the coronation. What do you make of that?
Well, kind of in a way. I mean, there are hundreds of islands, and there's a lot of other names that don't really get the attention.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't put a whole lot of gravity on that. I did visit Deception Island, and that was named because there is an underwater rock that has sunk ships even in this modern age. So we had to be very careful going into, it's called Neptune's Bellows, named by the old whalers. And look, Antarctica was only discovered 201 years ago. 200 years ago were the first whalers and sealers that went down there and set foot on land. They got their information from Captain Cook, who circumnavigated around Antarctica but never saw the continent. But he reported back in his journals about how rich in sea life and whales and seals there were, and that created the exodus of economic opportunists to go down there and harvest these marine mammals, and nearly drove several species to the point of extinction. We had the real great honor, and boy, was it a privilege for me to have this very iPhone on me at the time, were these right whales, and they were named by the whalers because they died the right way, meaning they floated to the top rather than sunk, so it was easier to pull them ashore. Nearly hunted to extinction, but they're slowly coming back, and a pod of them saw our sailboat, and they came over to us, and like the bull, the alpha male, he came right up to the boat within feet away and just kind of blew out his snout, and then right under the boat, man.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, this is like Moby Dick. It was
Wow.
intense. So
That's
one
crazy.
of the coolest things about Antarctica is the animals have no fear of people. You could literally come right up to a penguin with a little chick, and she's kind of like, hey, get out of my way, you're blocking my view. They don't see us as a threat at all because they're just
Wow.
not used to humans that down
That's
there.
amazing.
Hmm.
That is amazing. I mean, I'd love to talk to you about all of your different adventures because you've traveled the world. So, I mean, hopefully I can get you back on and we can talk about so many of these different subjects. I mean, I wonder about the islands, you know, I wonder if the white hats are just using those names, if they're, kind of playing games with us. But, and, the other thing I thought was interesting was one of the articles you sent to me, I think it was from Mass Awakening,
Yep.
that he mentioned that True South, I guess, is the only recognized flag by the signatories of the Antarctica Treaty, and it looks
Right.
almost identical to the logo for Ethereum, for the crypto, which is
Yeah.
interesting as well. It almost looks like the inverted Merkaba, that like the representation of the original geometry. So there's some interesting stuff going on down there in Antarctica. Any thoughts on that, or?
Well, you said it. A lot of interesting things going on. A lot of places you can hide. If you can capture the geothermal energy, you could actually live in a pretty equitable climate below the ice. Did you know that one of the 10 largest freshwater lakes in the planet is in Antarctica? It's called Lake Vostok, and the Russians have a base right above it, 2 miles above it. They finally were able to sink a drill bit down there in 2012, but it was contaminated. They got to put kerosene on it to keep it from freezing and cracking. So in 2016, they got a non-contaminated sample, and they found bacteria, which you think was from a species of fish that could be like a blind fish that has not been discovered. So there's even species of animals that could live down there that are still unknown to science. So it really is the great frontier. And in my presentation that I give at conferences, I talk about all the scientists that are down there, marine biologists and climatologists that are looking at how changes in the rest of the world are affecting Antarctica. And it is like a bellwether type of location, even though there's very little direct human activity there. The rest of human activity does have an effect on the way that Antarctica is changing, including species, habits. So we were seeing these penguin colonies that our saying was, you can smell it before you can see it. and they would just be the hillside covered in thousands of penguins, and how they got up all these little nooks and crannies, like a 10-story building up to have their little nest. And they're really funny to watch. They're very vocal, and they swim alongside you and jump out of the water like dolphins do. And so we had just so many of those experiences every day we were down there. It was quite a trip. So after getting through the rough Drake Passage, the Drake Shake as it's known, but sometimes it's real calm, and cruise ships will go there and they'll call it the Drake Lake and nobody gets seasick, but not for us. We got the Drake Shake. And then it was calm seas once we were in the Branford Straits and all these other waterways, and Paradise Cove was one of the names by all these really cool whaler names and stuff, and visiting their old whaling station in Deception Island and seeing wooden tombstones from the 19th century with Olaf von Gorfison names on it and stuff like that, and died in his 20s.
And nothing ever deteriorates down there, right?
That's right. And there's no germs or diseases, no viruses can live down there. And this was one of the problems with the New Berlin base, is that every time a resupply came through, if somebody just had a runny nose or something, everybody at the base would get sick. So it lowered people's immune responses and made them vulnerable. And so one interesting another historical note that a lot of people don't know about, but I write about it in Beyond Esoteric, was the Project Argus, or the nuclear bomb test in the late 1950s that was right offshore of New Schwabenland. And the cover story was they're testing the effect of nuclear bombs in the high atmosphere. And that created the ozone holes that we heard about in the 70s. Another test that went awry. But what I really think they were doing was lobbing some nukes over onto the New Berlin base. So one of the reasons I wanted to go down there, if I were to go back again with like a film crew, would be with Geiger counters and to see if we could prove that it actually got nuked. Because get this, in the very next year after Argus, that's when they started drafting the Antarctica Treaty. And one of the very most prominent aspects of the Antarctica Treaty is there shall never be any nuclear testing either before or after. And the wording was like, well, why would you say that if there never was any nuclear testing here? And okay, so we won't do it in the future, but are you saying that we nuked Antarctica? But nobody's admitting to that just yet.
So let me ask you this. One more question on Antarctica is, I've heard that there are there's a Stargate there. Can you speak about that? What do you know about that?
Well, I understand there's several different kinds of Stargates, and I have a photograph of one that was discovered in Egypt. There were also Stargates in Ur, the ziggurats of the Fertile Crescent. You know, the reason why on the Second Gulf War, the first thing American troops did was secure the museums in Baghdad, the main museum,
I've heard that.
because it had a Stargate. They couldn't allow Saddam or anybody else to escape through that. So
actually, Brad, I should have asked you this first. I'm sorry, but can you just briefly explain what is a Stargate for those out there in the audience who may not know, because you're the guy to ask.
Well, I would say it would tie into what I was describing earlier, and that is matching this level of 9/10 the speed of light. So perhaps if you can get a wheel spinning that fast, super, super fast, it can create a gravity and time wormhole that you can step through. In modern age, we have Stargates called jump rooms. And there's one in El Segundo down in LA, right across from the LAX airport. I've driven by it. It's the old Hughes aircraft building, which has
Gina's talked about they have them in the Hiltons too.
Yeah. Now that they've moved them around. So this technology is a way that you can transport organic material. So I've spoken to in person Andrew Basiago and seen many of his videos. And he was doing the jump room back to historical times. Andrew Basiago claims that it's him as the little kid in the Gettysburg photograph when Lincoln was sitting down really quickly and you could barely make him out in the crowd. But there's a kid wearing real baggy Union clothes and super huge shoes on his feet. And he says, well, he had to come in naked to go to Gettysburg as a preteen, and he had to pick up clothes from dead Union soldiers, including the shoes. And so that
Wow.
he says that's him.
That's crazy.
So they've been using this technology to change history. Once again, like I was saying, there are ET groups that are coming back to this time to keep the timeline in their favor. And in the same way, Andrew Basiago was actually sent to speak to General George Washington, and Hamilton was there. And that was the night they crossed the Delaware. He said, you guys got to get out of here. You're going to get sacked the next day. You're going to lose the war. If you don't get in your boats tonight, Christmas Eve, and get out of here. And sure enough, that was very sound historical advice. And,
Sure was.
And Washington said to Hamilton, what do you make of this child? Says, well, he seems to have some information that we could use here, General. Maybe we should take him on it. So
Wow.
That's the story of Andrew Basiago. Go do your own research if you want to look into that. But it ties into the whole notion of stargates, into jump rooms, into transporting even to other star systems, much like the movie called Stargate, which I just watched again recently and is really a great movie, where they go to this pyramid-like culture on another planet and a whole bunch of things happen. And
now Stargates, you can go back and forth, right? And portals are only one way. So you know, like you jump into a portal, you have no idea if you're ever coming back unless you can create a portal. You know, I'm learning about the differences. I mean, what can you tell us about portals as opposed to Stargates? And then we can kind of circle back to the the Stargate question in Antarctica, because I've been told it was kind of a pivotal one for so many of the negative groups. So,
well, so great question. And it's my understanding that there is a natural portal on both of the poles, a natural one. The one in the Arctic goes to the constellation or the planet Vega, and they are actually benevolent ETs. And so there are ways, if you know how to harness these wormholes, and of course our theoretical physicists have discussed this, how to send craft through, how to send personnel through. You can use that to go from system to system if you know where you're going. But like I said earlier, the pilots and passengers have to be properly trained and advanced in a spiritual kind of way, because if you were to get up to the 9/10 the speed of light, you then become your spirit body. And if that's scary to you, or you don't know what to do, or
that means you start to lose physical form, right?
correct,
Go into a higher density.
Yep. Right. And again, this is all concepts that probably many of your listeners are new to. I've been just learning them because I just love this kind of information. And what I do, Patriot, is I put together data points. I have no reason to make anything up or lead anybody astray. I'm just very curious about the workings of the world. And so this has just been such a fascination for me my entire life. In fact, I found some old drawings when I was a little kid. I was drawing gray aliens and stuff. So I seem to have been born into this lifetime with some kind of curiosity into the whole machinations and the exopolitics of the extraterrestrials meeting with humanity. And look, this could be the greatest moment in human history if we could come together in a peaceful way with the benevolent ETs. I mean, humanity would really just take off, excel with this technology, with this knowledge, with this new ability to travel the solar systems like they did in Star Trek. To boldly go where no man has gone before. And I would love to see it in our lifetimes. And I think it's possible to do so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amen to that. I mean, so Antarctica is obviously a very key location. There is a Stargate there that I've been told that a lot of the negative groups use to kind of get in and out of there. Um, and I think I think it's probably going. We'll probably find out more information. Is there anything else you can tell us about that specific one?
Well, I understand it's on Rothschild Island. Here we go again.
Okay.
It is an artificial one, so it was manufactured or brought down there. Um, Unlike the one at the pole, South Pole, which would be a natural one. And they were trying to harness it to bring in other ships, craft, and that's what CERN is. The one below Lake Geneva in Switzerland and France, that's the largest hadron collider, and one of the secondary, perhaps the primary use of it, is to create a giant Stargate. You know, it's many miles around. It goes through 2 countries and right up there to Lake Geneva. But, and you'll hear this from Gene Decode, they've had some earthquakes there.
I was going to say, yeah, they've.
Down.
Yeah.
I think they took out CERN for that very reason, that they couldn't allow it to be in fully operational mode where ships and entities could come through.
Yeah, and so much of this is about frequency as well. And I've heard that they're using the Large Hadron Collider now, that the Alliance might be using it uh, to generate positive healing frequencies. I was listening to an interview today. I think it was it was Michelle Fielding's interview with Nicholas Benyam, and she was talking a lot about the I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, but and I haven't listened to the whole thing, but one of the things they talked about was the Alliance is looking at ways of getting all of these healing frequencies through the new quantum phones, the whole new quantum system. And we haven't really, talked about frequency tonight. I mean, what can you tell us about, what you see coming in terms of, that and the future of the quantum system? I mean, there are people out there who say that, the quantum system, the quantum financial system isn't a real thing. I happen to believe that it is. What are your thoughts on the how quantum technology is factoring into where we are right now?
Well, the great inventor Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the mysteries of the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. So that's what it's all about. Our bodies, every piece of matter has a frequency in it. Frequencies can change or even shatter matter. Think, for example, opera singer is able to shatter a wine glass with her voice. So take that on an industrial level, and then you can also have teleportation, levitation. And there are videos on YouTube where you can see a bowling ball being levitated, giant rocks. I think this is the secret of the megaliths. It's another aspect that I talk about in my conference lecture series, how these megalithic blocks from South America to Egypt and in Lebanon, they have blocks that can't even be moved by our biggest cranes, let alone precisely put in place. Right?
Right. How'd that happen?
There's a lost technology that still we're playing catch up to. And
that's why they've hidden quantum physics from the public. Basically, everything advanced physics has been kept top secret.
That's right. And then auditive levitation was a technique used by the ancient Tibetans. In fact, right before Tibet was taken over by China, I describe it in a chapter called Secret Sciences in Future Esoteric book, of a Swedish physician who had met some of the lamas when he was traveling, and then he was summoned back to help out an ailing lama. They needed some Western medicine in this case to help this guy, and he did, and he saved his life. And then they said, well, now we're going to show you something that we do. And they took him out to this field, and he even draw diagrams, and I reproduced them in Future Esoteric to show you his drawings. And they would have 3 rows of musicians. Well, there were the trumpeters, these long Tibetan trumpets, and there were drummers, and then there were chanters. So all the monks from the monasteries came out, and it was like in a horseshoe shape, and right in the middle was the rock. And so Dr. Jarl was just in the back watching. What are they going to do? And so they would create this cacophony of sound, vibration, and then all of a sudden the boulder would start shaking. And then they would lift their heads up, and the rock would move, and they'd place it up on a shelf on a ledge. So consciousness also played a role in how they were able to do it.
It's unbelievable to me how much knowledge they had and how much has been hidden from us. And by the way, it's we mentioned the med beds earlier. Those work on high frequency healing as well. Is that right?
That's right.
Awesome.
So we have a lot to look forward to. It's going to be
yeah, absolutely.
Time to stay alive.
Absolutely. So that's actually a great kind of a segue into my last question, which was kind of focused more on your book and your most recent book. It's Beyond Esoteric, but the subtitle is Escaping Prison Planet, right?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So Escaping Prison Planet, that's something that's a concept that I've talked about a lot.
Yes,
it's a topic that you obviously are passionate about. You've written an entire book about it. So where do you think we are right now? And, in terms of escaping Prison Planet, because all of us feel that we're really on the cusp of this major breakthrough event that's going to change everything. And it's not going to necessarily happen right away. People have a bunch of different theories about how this is all going to unfold. But I'm curious just to kind of get your thoughts about, the big picture. Where do you see humanity right now in the big picture? And, how close are we to escaping Prison Planet? How do we do it? People out there in the audience who are listening, who are wondering, what can they do to contribute to this movement? Any thoughts on the big picture?
Sure. Great final question. Well, just remember in the Art of Law, one of the Sun Tzu and how to defeat your enemy, first you have to know what you're up against. And so all this time through the long march of history, we just haven't not only understood that we're in this false matrix, that's this prison planet, the soul screens that zap our memory and we keep coming back lifetime after lifetime without remembering who we are, but we're just prisoners of this construct. And so for the very first time in history, we're starting to learn the MO, the mode of operandi of how this all works. And when you start to learn it, when you start to know that you're really a spirit in a human body, like the bumper sticker says, you're not a human having a spiritual experience. You're the spirit
having a human
just
experience.
down here having the human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so once we start realizing that everything we do and every thought is going to be part of who we are, and that when we die, it's not going up to St. Peter and being judged by an exterior force. It's us looking at our life review and understanding what we've done in our lifetime, all the pain and suffering we may have caused, or all the good that we've done. And so I think if you tip the scale on the good side, maybe you have the option of coming back. I think that's the Philosopher's Stone, because you know that everything you do and say and think and feel and put out there in the world is going to affect you and your karma and how you're going to come back or not. You're going to be the best person you could possibly be. And that's why this has been withheld from us, this kind of knowledge. So I think once we reach a certain critical mass and enough people start doing this and start acting and being correct in everything they do, we can put an end to violence. We can really move mountains with peaceful, non-violent resistance, as Martin Luther King and Gandhi and so many others have demonstrated. Then we convert the prison planet into a prism planet. And that is humans ascending into 5D. And again, I think that could be very well possible within our lifetimes. But the revolution is consciousness. And so the more people that start to become aware of this, the closer we reach that critical mass, that 100th monkey effect, where the human race could go through a very rapid ascension
Mm.
And so many things we will just start to become innately aware of, including our chakra systems. Maybe we'll even become telepathic and be able to use telekinesis and use our mind to change matter.
Yeah,
There's
that's
so
another
much
topic I want to
possibility.
get into on a different conversation, is about, the capacity of humanity, the
Yep.
potential of humanity, that, our pineal and all that stuff. I want to talk and, get your thoughts on all that. But this has been an incredible conversation. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for all of your time and, for your amazing information. This has been so much fun. And I know that the audience, I'm sure, is probably going to agree with that. So thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And boy, 2 hours went by with the snap of a finger. So,
It
it's
sure
a great
did.
conversation when it goes by that quick.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can get you back on at some point soon, and we can get into a whole bunch of other subjects. And you know, it would be wonderful if we could do that.
Oh, absolutely.
All
Happy
right.
to
Well,
come on with you anytime.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Brad Olsen. Everybody, absolutely amazing. So thank you again, and I'll be back soon with another report. Thank you, everybody. Please share the links. Do everything that you can to support my work, and of course Brad's work as well. By the way, where can folks go to, as sort of a central hub to find your work and, you know, everything Brad Olsen?
Yep. So if you want to know about publishing business, CCC Publishing, not sure if you can read that. Esoteric Series is another website just for the book series. That's where you can get a signed copy if you order through the website, the only place that comes through my office, and I'll do that for people.
I'd love
If you
one.
want to know more about what I'm up to or what conferences I'm speaking at bradolsen.com, BRADOLSEN.com.
Awesome.
Two
All right.
best
God
sites.
bless, Brad. Thank you so much for all your time. God bless.
Oh, you bet. Thank you, Patriot.
All right. Bye, everybody. Patriot out.